Hey everyone, Panyo here. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of After Dinner Mints. I highly encourage everyone tuning in to join us in the Art Blocks Discord. A link to our Discord can be found in the show notes. As always, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode of our show. And now I want to introduce our guest for today. We have generative artist, Kristian Stoveland. How are you doing, Per?
Hi there. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I'm super glad to talk to you today. I know we're going to be chatting about the harvest a little bit later on, but maybe for people that don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. I'm a generative artist. I come from Norway, live in Oslo. I have an education in graphic design, but I'm a self-taught programmer just after I finished graduating. And I've been into the ad and design agencies up until about 8-9 years ago, when I started a new alternative studio where we work at the intersection of technology, art, design, and architecture. There's a lot of generative art we're working with there, installations and scenography. And just recently, a couple of years ago, I started with and got into the NFT scene, and have been in there since, and working parallel with this studio, which we started 8 years ago.
Great. And yeah, I know we'll talk a little bit about the studio in just a moment. Who were some, when you started learning about generative art or getting into the art scene, who were some of those artists that you kind of looked up to, inspired your work early on in your career?
Well, actually, I think most of the inspiration I had came from early in my career. I got quickly into Flash. Flash, so the program used at beginning of the 2000s, before HTML and JavaScript were rich enough to make these high quality animations and stuff like that. And I was really into the community there. And from that place, you had people, big players which are in the NFT scene, some not though, but you have like Joshua Davis, Mario Klingemann, G-Monk. And after I had been working through this in Flash for quite a while, I discovered Open Frameworks, which is a C++ framework built for designers wanting to code. And from that scene, I mean, people like Zach Lieberman, Thea Watson, and Golden Levin are people that I really got inspired by. And recently now, Daito Manabe, for example, does a lot of cool work. And a lot of this has kind of been the foundation of my inspiration going into generative art and trying to build new experiences with the design and technology. Now, recently, I'm inspired by a lot of the people I see in the NFT space, but it's harder to kind of pinpoint one specifically or some specific artists. But I would say that the ones I mentioned are probably the ones that kind of formed a lot of my inspiration from the start and has been with me since then.
Great. And yeah, do you mind sharing with us, some of that early generative artwork that you've created in the past?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of years ago, I started with just kind of getting into the NFT space, and a few months in, my application into Known Origin was accepted, and we have this. One of the first series I made is this reaction diffusion pieces. It's a series of 6 works, and you can see how what I did here was kind of taking the standard reaction diffusion, but playing around with colors to see how this would work. It was, in the beginning, I was really kind of trying to find myself. I'm really happy with these, especially the colonies number 6 is probably one of my favorite. It's just the colors and the way it kind of explodes has been, I'm happy with those. And the same on the Known Origin platform, I made this a series of 5. I call them recursive triangles. It's a series of 5 different shapes where I use the recursive triangle technique to kind of just build the texture of these objects and emulating some kind of granite type of feeling to it, some stone. And just after I had been working on known origin, FX hash quickly popped up. This was in the autumn, late 2021. And I have a few series I played around with and tested there, which kind of got me into these long form type of generative art. And so you have Shift and Skavert. Skavert is kind of, I would say, was the first one that kind of really hit me where it was supposed to. It's been a long, I haven't been working with generative art in this kind of way before. In Void, we work a lot with animation and parameterized designs and art, but the FX hash helped me get into kind of the way you have to think about randomizing stuff, but also keeping it deterministic, which was real fun. So that's kind of the previous artwork I've been having. I've had before Harvest. I started working on Harvest last summer, so I haven't been focusing on so much, other than that lately.
Great, that's awesome to hear. And you were mentioning Void, which is an experiential art and design studio that you work at. Can you tell us a little bit about that studio and the kind of work you do there?
Yeah, sure. So we started Void. We're 4 people that founded Void, and we're not more than 6 people now. And we've stayed small because we would like to keep kind of control of what kind of projects we want to do. Because the reason we started Void was we were all kind of tired of the same repetitive cycle of ad agencies and design agencies. You kind of design a website, you build a website, and then yada yada. So we wanted to kind of get out of that and try to focus on building some real experiences where return of investment wasn't kind of the main point of it. It was more about creating an experience, more like branding in a sense. So what we work with there is we build a lot of installations, permanent ones, outdoors maybe. It's part of art in the buildings that are kind of so there are a lot of office spaces that are built in and in the same. You often have to kind of a lot of the people we work for, they use some part of their budget for art in this building when it's complete, and we've kind of found a way to get into that kind of pot to build more integrated art into the buildings instead of site-specific stuff, which has often an interactive element where you in some way can interact with these pieces. And we have been into scenography, where we've been doing lights and special interactive kind of scenography for artists and shows.
That's awesome. And it sounds like Void is a very it's like a big creative hub for you and for your colleagues. And I'm curious to know, how does Void kind of influence your work and your creativity?
Well, in many ways, it has a lot of my creativity is spent on the technical aspects of things, because we try always to combine maybe conventional technology but in new ways. So for example, one installation called Delta, which is a river of lights embedded into the pavement around an office space. It has a constant animation going through, which is supposed to kind of invite you into the backyard of this block. But it also has 25 3D sensors attached all around, so we can get a point cloud of everything that's happening around it. So as soon as a person kind of walks over the river, it starts reacting to where you are and animates around you there. So a lot of our philosophy is when we want interaction to our installations, we would rather not use any other device other than your body. So we put a lot of energy and effort into devices that can detect things without having to download an app or in some way go into a web page to interact with something. We kind of want to cut the barrier between the physical and the digital, and we often kind of we say that instead of pulling the physical into the digital world, we kind of do it the other way around. We try to pull the digital world into the physical world, because we are all physical beings in the end. And there's something magic when you can see some technological thing react to yourself in the same way you would react to another person.
That's great. And it sounds like, it just sounds like a very special place. And, I'm glad that, you're doing stuff at Void, but then also kind of carrying some of that work over into this, NFT digital space that we're all a part of.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask, I was curious, what was your introduction into this NFT crypto space? I know you mentioned some of the artists that have, that are generative artists that have created projects. Did you find it via Twitter, or were there some friends and family that knew about it?
Well, I think I heard about NFTs for the first time around 2020. I wasn't into the crypto space at all or anything like that. It was, but one of my colleagues and partners in crime at Void, he heard about art blocks and NFTs and kind of explained to me that he had what kind of NFTs were. And he also released the list of Sisyphus on art blocks.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of sitting in the back seat and watching him going through that process. And, following him helped me just understand how well the blockchain is fit for generative art. Mm-hmm. And after his drop, I just got more and more into it. I got really interested to see what the space was. I saw there was a lot of people putting a lot of value into this. There was something there that I didn't catch straight away. But as the more I kind of dived into it, I realized that this is something I want to do, because I was doing this in 2003, 2004 when I started with Flash. But now it felt more mature, if you see what I mean. This was kind of the place where generative art actually could, prosper is probably the word I'm looking for. So I just quickly after his drop, I set up my Instagram account. I was already on Twitter and just started kind of focusing a lot of my spare time. It became my new hobby, basically. I had other hobbies before that, which had to kind of make way for this, though. And I really started just going, really nerding on this. And so that's kind of my introduction to NFTs, and I've been in there since. It's a very fascinating space. And the funny thing is that when I was kind of going into this space, I realized there were a lot of people that I looked up to from the Flash days that were in the space already. So it felt like coming home again.
That's super cool to hear that, it's almost like full circle. You kind of heard about it, and then you had some friends, a colleague that worked at Void, and they kind of helped, provide a little bit of, I don't know, they helped like kind of show you like the possibilities of blockchain technology. So I'm super happy that you're able to join.
Yeah, me too.
Well, let's jump into the Harvest. That's your first project on Art Blocks. It was a curated release just the other month. Maybe you can tell us the inspiration process for creating the Harvest.
Well, I think the whole project started off as me. This last summer, I was back at our family cabin. It's just by the sea here in southern Norway. There's a lot of landscape there. A lot of archipelagos just outside the coast. So I think the whole thing started with me wanting to try and build landscapes, because I've always been fascinated by that. And I was trying to find a way to stylize it in some way that could be unique. And during that process, just playing around with this code, one of these beams popped up as a small mistake. And I just knew there was something there. And as soon as I started playing more about having beams come down to this landscape, the story of the harvest kind of just started unfolding in my mind, because part of my background, which I haven't mentioned yet, is that one of my main hobbies since I was a teen is tabletop role-playing games. I've been a dungeon master or a game master, whatever you call it, for many years. So as soon as I saw what happened, in the artwork while I was playing around with it, the story started unfolding in the same way that improvisational storytelling happens in tabletop role-playing games. And at the same time, I'm a really sci-fi buff, and have been since I was probably 5-6 years old. I remember this astronomy book my dad bought me, which I never left. I was really into planets and stars. So seeing that, I immediately went into some kind of sci-fi world and started building a story about who is creating these beams. Why is it hitting this planet? Starting asking myself questions like this, and just filling the story up, and at the same time working on the code and the artwork to kind of I didn't want to get it real detailed. I wanted the whole art piece to be abstract in a way that other people could also create their own stories when they're seeing a harvest mint. So I didn't want it to make. I wanted to make it epic, but vague enough for people to actually be able to create their own stories.
That's cool to hear. And you mentioned that you're a sci-fi buff. Sounds like you kind of grew up with that, just watching different types of movies, books, games. Yeah. That all inspired you. But can you share the meaning behind the name, The Harvest?
So the harvest is because the harvest was. So the meaning behind the harvest is that the entity behind these beams is known as the caretaker, and this is an entity that slumbers for millennia before it has to kind of wake up, replenish itself, and then keep its garden of worlds going. And the harvest is the event at which this entity wakes up and starts regaining its strength by visiting each of its worlds to harvest the resources it needs to sustain.
Very cool. I love that. And I just wanted to bring up, so your project description states that the harvest is aiming to capture a moment of awe. The beams reach to their origin, emulating a cathedral-like atmosphere in the vein of Hugh Ferris, while borrowing inspiration from Michael Whelan's landscapes, all in the effort of capturing a sense of how small we are in relation to the cosmos. Can you kind of just unpack that statement for us? It seems like there's just like a lot of inspiration from these two people, and just I would love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, I think so. I'll start with the capturing sense of how small we are in relation to the cosmos. So this is probably one of the things I think about most, is our place in the universe. It's I get awestricken by thinking how small we are in the vast cosmos that we at least can observe now. And a lot of kind of the sci-fi influence I've had that has kind of hit me the most are more of these existential epic tales that kind of span over eons. Because again, it just makes us aware how small we are and how precious life is. I'm very privileged to be here in this world and can experience the beauty of it. And that's kind of what I'm talking about when I want to capture a moment of awe. It's the grandiose scale of the universe trying to be captured into the harvest. And so when I created the harvest, Hugh Ferris wasn't a direct inspirational, wasn't directly, or I wasn't aware that I was inspired by it, but I knew about this architect and his style, and just quite deep into the project, I realized that there's some resemblance to there, that it for me it was quite natural that it had to come from there. And the same with Michael Whelan. He has He has made a lot of CD covers of bands I've listened to. I mean, books. I wasn't. So I realized, or I noticed Michael Whelan by name a couple of years ago when I read a few books that he had covered. And when I went looking at what was previous works, I just realized there's a lot of books and CD covers I've been using without knowing that was him. And I think a lot of his artwork has inspired me subconsciously, and is kind of a part of the whole Harvest experience again. And it's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly where, but of all the inspiration I would say Harvest comes from, I would say these two are the easiest to kind of pinpoint, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool to hear. And for a lot of people that might not know, you have to watch these pieces in live view because it shows, that live rendering of the artwork, which I think is so crucial to kind of see the construction of each and every piece. How did you arrive on that like live render decision? Is that something that was always a part of this project, or was it kind of late, or how did that come about?
Well, it's the animation. So the animation came out of the necessity because whilst I was working on this in the beginning, I realized quite quickly that it takes time for the computer to draw all these lines. So at some point, I was trying to think of ways to get around that issue in optimizing and stuff like that. So I did some optimization, but I realized that animation was probably a must to create the richness I wanted. But because it could take 40 or 50 seconds before the whole thing was drawn. And that wasn't acceptable for me. So I landed on the decision doing and animating it in so that people could kind of enjoy the artwork as it is being created. When I look back at it now and see the result, I'm very happy I ended up with that decision. So it's kind of it wasn't intentional that was supposed to be that animation was supposed to be like that. It was more out of necessity, but I'm very happy with how the animation came to be. And I had done some tweaking to make it as nice as possible.
Yeah, I thought it was just executed. I think you mentioned it best. It's like it has to be a part of the project because I think you mentioned, it takes upwards of 50 seconds for each piece. So it's like for people to wait that long, it's nice to see the actual process of how, each and every mint is created. And there's so much detail. I kind of noticed, like, just zooming in, all of the, I call it like pillars, just being like built throughout the entire mountain or the landscape is just a beautiful touch.
Thank you.
One thing I think people might not know about are, the different features and what they represent in each of the mints. And so I would love for you to kind of talk a little bit about specifically what these mean, harvester and support drones, what those mean, why they were included.
Yeah. So we can start with those. I mean, so the harvester feature is it details what kind of beams you'll see. So the harvester has 5 types. You have the most basic one, which is the minor, I've called it. It's when you get one beam quite gathered together, not too big, but kind of centered in the piece, or a bit off. But it's just one single small beam, or a gathering of smaller you can have multiple rays down, but they build up to one kind of concentrated beam. And then you have the squadron, which is 2 to 5 of these same type of beams, but it kind of the composition becomes or becomes different because you have these are kind of playing together. And you also have the array, which is more like a longer, wide, spread out set of beams. I like to picture a lot of these beams as one kind of drone above us, beaming down, and the configuration of these beams tells us what kind of vessel is above us. And then you have the barge, which is the biggest one, where you get a lot of beams at the same time, spread out, but it covers quite a lot of the Yeah, I would say both of these behind me are barges. And finally, you have the drones, which is one of the more rare ones. That's just a lot of small single beams everywhere. And depending on your role on your token, it could be a lot of them or it could be a few of them.
Very
And
cool.
then we have the support drones, is kind of an extra feature, because when I worked on this, I noticed that in some compositions, if you had some extra satellite drones and some beams over there, it could give some extra. It could give some some interesting composition, which wasn't possible without that feature. And there are, they go for all. I mean, most of the pieces don't have. I mean, about half of them don't have any drone support, but all the others have few, some, several, and many drones, depending on your role.
Cool.
So I'm not
And
sure if you want to.
yeah. You're gonna show.
Yeah, but what I was going to say is more about there are a few other features which I would say is interesting. You have the surface and topography. It tells us a lot about what kind of landscape you're going to get. I mean, the topography has kind of details the different mountains you'll see in the landscape. Anything from volcanic to just mountainous or slated. And so that's one pass through kind of the landscape generator, and then the next pass would take you to what kind of surface you want, and then you can get anything from fissures to liths to stalagmites or just rough surfaces.
Cool. And I'm curious to know, just because once the project is fully sold out, everything's minted, you can't change anything about it. What's minted is what's there. Did you look through all the mints, and did you notice that you wish that something came out a little bit more or maybe a little bit less?
Wow. I mean, yeah, that's a good question. I've seen probably tens of thousands of these outputs since October, November last year. So for me, I'm kind of I feel I've seen everything. There are some that cropped up that were quite special, but I don't think I feel I missed anything. But maybe I could have more of some things, for example. But no, I think all the features I would like to see are in there.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I know it's different for everyone, and I know this is actually, I think, a tough question for a lot of artists is, like, how do you know when a project is fully complete? Like, I think people could always pinpoint small things like, oh, I could change this and that. And then maybe once the project is done, I'm sure some artists even say, I wish I ended up doing this. But it's like, once it's out there, it's like, on the blockchain, can't change anything. Was there any of that? Like, did you know that? Did you ever look back and like, oh man, maybe I should like tweak this a little bit more? I feel like it's got to be tough for an artist.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but that goes nearly for anything I create. I always I know Leonardo da Vinci has this quote, I think it's him at least, which kind of resonates to me. Is that an artwork is never completed. It's merely abandoned. So at some point you just abandon it, and that's when it's finished. If you see what I mean. I never feel that I don't think there's any work I felt it's complete.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. And one thing that really is striking about each of the mints is the color palettes that you kind of put into this project. There's a lot of really great contrast with all the colors that you kind of selected. And I'm curious to know, like, what is the process for you to kind of generate and create these color palettes, and for this specific project?
I think, I mean, a few of the palettes are palettes I kind of have developed, over a few years. But the way I like to work on palettes is I often start with contrast colors. I often want to see, two opposite colors and in some way create a gradient between them that is interesting. That's kind of the default way I attack a palette. But there's a lot of palettes I just see a combo of colors. Like for example, so I could, for example, take a picture of the sky when it has some kind of nice sunset or whatever, and just sample colors from that and see how they work. So there's a lot of testing and failing. There can also be it could be just a photo I took anywhere and just seeing some color combinations that trigger my interest, and then I go test it out. So there's a lot of testing first before I land on some palettes. And what I often do is make many more palettes than I think I'm going to use, and then kind of just take the ones I don't like away. I have to kind of see the palette over a longer period of time before I can decide if that's a good one or not. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And how does the algorithm kind of decide on the color of the beams? Because I'm sure it has to play into the contrast of the actual landscape. And yeah, I'm just curious to know your process.
So the way this specifically selects is, I mean, the palette gets selected, weighted palette selection, and there are different ways it does, but the gist of it is basically it has this palette in a sequence, and I can work through the palette starting from one of the colors and just kind of creating a gradient across the list of colors in that palette. But I can also kind of go back and forth and kind of create some organic variations. And in some cases, it's just randomly distributed. But yeah, it's heavily based on the kind of the sequence that the palette is stored in, and how I kind of shuffle around that and play around with looping back and forth between colors.
Got it. That's great. And I noticed you have a couple of the prints in the background. I believe you mentioned that those are some test prints, I believe, before the project came out. Can you share, like, how do you envision collectors displaying the art from this collection? I know that prints are available as an option, but is there anything that you'd recommend, like, digitally as well, since there is that live rendering aspect?
Yeah, definitely. I would. I mean, I come from graphic design, the traditional print-based graphic design world. That's where my education was, and I quickly kind of left the print world and went into digital. So I knew that this project here, I really wanted to make prints for it, because there's if you remember, in Void, we want to try pull the digital out into the physical. So I really wanted to make something physical. There's something about artwork that as soon as it gets physical, it becomes it hits different, if I can say that. Yeah, so it was first of all, I thought this was going to be printed and framed, but like you said, as soon as the animation came in, it was definitely part of the artwork, the animation. So I mean, I think the most correct way of viewing it would be on a digital screen, kind of where you can see the animation. Maybe, for example, let's say you saw the animation, it stood there for about 30 seconds, and then maybe reloaded again, so you could see the animation build it. I think that would probably, be the best way to view a harvest.
Okay, great. And usually my favorite part of these conversations is talking to the artists and having them talk about some of their favorite mints, if you don't mind sharing that with
sure.
us.
Yeah. I'd love to. Yeah, there we go.
Yep.
So first of all, this will be in mint invocation order. So I'll start with harvest mint harvest 0. The reason I want to show this one is I still own this one, and probably will forever, because I was really happy with mint 0. This kind of harkens back to my teenage or young adult time, where I was playing black metal in a band, and this really kind of captures the essence of black metal in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just the surface property here, the stalagmites, they really kind of makes the whole thing much more grainy, because the variations between each block in the landscape are so varied that the graininess comes a bit more across.
I love that.
And we have, sorry.
I was going to ask you actually about Mint Zero. You know, I think a lot of people don't know that. I mean, they know, but probably don't understand I'm sure the nerves that go into actually hitting Mint for like Mint Zero, because, you know, obviously that's the first one of the official collection. So like,
Yeah.
do you mind like sharing some of your thoughts of like how you felt when you hit that button? Was it a sense of joy, relief, you know, all the above?
I think the few hours before I was going to do Mint Zero, my heart was thumping. I was really nervous because I was so afraid that anything was going to go wrong. I got a small sense of relief just after Mint Zero and seeing the result. I was very happy with the result, but that just the nervousness for the release just came then. So I mean, it was a little less stressed after Mint Zero, but I think most of the stress was just before the auction opened, and just to see if people liked it. I mean, there's a lot of things going through your mind, and the 2 weeks from when you do Mint Zero until the 1 week before the Mint Zero until you actually release. Yeah, the best thing I did there was actually just log off social media for a week just to make sure. Yeah.
That's a good call. Okay, sorry. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so let's go to mint number 9. The reason I want to pull out this one is that this is a squadron featured. It has only two harvesters in this squadron, but the way the color has been split basically into two separate beams is one of my favorite things that can happen with this. There are a few others where you have more. The next one, I'll go back to the next one here. This is the same thing. It's the same palette, but this is a squadron of 4 with a few support drones. You can see the yellow and the single black one, or the dark blue one close to us, are some support drones. And I just wanted to pull both of these to just illustrate kind of how the color selection can be different. So here you get this mixed. You see some green and and yellow and blue into this. You see some of the more yellow here, but in the next one it's just clean. The colors are separated very cleanly. And I also really like the on this one 67. I really like the way the landscape is it's very sleek, just rolling over. Let's move on. Now this is probably one of my favorites. Yeah. The funny thing is, this on the rarity scale, it's quite common, but there are only 3 pieces in the Harvest collection that have one single beam like this. This one has a single fat beam, and combined with the lith's surface feature, the point where it actually kind of meets the beam meets the landscape, there's something really enigmatic happening there. You also get the feeling that maybe this is a civilization of buildings which is being wrecked by the caretaker. I mean, the millennia has gone since he last visited this planet, so who knows, maybe civilization lived there and it's now being torn to pieces. I know also that I'm not sure who coined the term, but I know the term "the arrival" has been coined for this piece, which I really like. So yeah. Next, this is also one of my favorites. This is also because that palette is also one of my favorites. It's the Barbacoa. which just has this rich combo of, or the way the color melds in this one is what really has me into this one. And also you can see again how this lit surface kind of mixes up the color in a way that other landscape features don't. But yeah, this is probably one of my top 10s.
Yeah, that's like a stunning piece. I feel like that would be a really stunning piece to, frame, like obviously print it out, frame that one, just because how rich that color is and how spread out it is throughout that piece.
Yeah, and this one has been printed, so in large format. So it was a pleasure seeing that one live, or sorry, physically. And let's see here now. Now you have this one more. This is you kind of a more of a, what you could say, a standard harvest, if you see what I mean. This is the most the basic minor single gathered beam. And I wanted to highlight this one because this is kind of where the harvest started. Most of my the first couple of weeks I was working on this, a lot of the pieces looked like this before I started with a lot of the variations. So for me, this is kind of the essence of harvest, and the way the landscape is just texture in the background, and giving a lot of room for the way the color is playing in this piece is something I really like. And now we have this is also one of my top 10s. It's the number 289. The reason this one is quite dear to me is that the palette here is probably one of my oldest palettes. So this one has been with me for a year or two, and not much adjusted. The way the blue, I really like the way blue, yellow, and orange kind of the expression they give, the feeling they give me at least. And this is a barge, which is also it can let you really get a lot of that grain from the harvesting, flying up and mixing really well together. And it also has this angled approach to the. I mean, you see that it's slightly tilted, which gives an extra dynamic feel to it. And now we have the 306, which is the Caldari palette. I think Caldari palette is one of my top favorite palettes. This one was built for, or I made this palette for the harvest. And the way this one spreads, this one is more like, I'm a bit unsure, but I'm quite sure that this is the drones. This is the drones feature of the harvesters. So here you can see more of the spread out type of beams, and how their reach is quite long in this one. This is another feature, is how far does a beam kind of spread out when it hits the landscape. So here you have a combination of a lot of different. It has a quite high rarity, and it's. I think the combination of this one and the composition is just sits perfectly together. What I also realized is that the dark palettes have had a tendency to be more popular, which was interesting. I mean, I love the dark palettes, but I didn't expect that to happen. I might become biased now because people have said that these are the dark ones are really pretty. So I like the dark ones a bit more than probably I did before. Not that I didn't like them, but yeah. But this one stood out to me, and the reason I like this one is the smoothness of the landscape, and how these ley lines are just streaking through to the landscape. I mean, these small lines marking the landscape. And the palette here is also this one was also built for the harvest, and the name is Arrakis, and is hearkening to one of my favorite sci-fi shows ever, Dune, or books, if you will. And and it really captures the essence of sci-fi in my mind.
Yeah, that's a beautiful mint right there. I love that one. Just the contrast, and then like you mentioned, just the I don't know if how much of a fan I was with like the dark backgrounds in the past, but I mean I think that one is probably just like a stellar mint just in general, just with like how centered those beams are in the middle, and yeah, that's a beautiful composed piece right there. I love that one.
Yeah, I also love how they flow down the hillside here, and you can see kind of how it follows the the fissures going down here.
Yeah, it kind of gives a like almost a lava kind of vibe to it. It's nice.
Yeah. So next would be this palette, which is Sulaco, of course. There you go. The Sulaco palette this is the palette along with the same palette used in the Mint Zero, which is the kind of flip. Those palettes are the palettes I kind of work when I work on composition and everything that doesn't have to do with color. Those are the palettes I always use, or used, sorry. And I kind of tend to stick to black and white when I'm doing composition, because you can hide a lot of boring stuff if you use color. So I think this palette is the one that's been with me the longest when I've been working on Harvest. So it kind of brings me back to that time of building the Harvest. And also the way the beams here kind of mix together, it's kind of, I mean, there are some support drones here which hit this major center beam, and the way it just mixes when it hits the ground is quite epic in my view. And you see that there's a lot of randomness to the way they spread out when they hit. So they kind of spread out in quite different. You have the long ones here and more short ones on this side. It's just, I mean, this part here of the piece is really captivating in my view.
Yeah, great one.
And now we have the 373, which is also one of my top 10s, I guess. Yeah. It's the way this one here illustrates a lot of way what I was talking about when I was talking about the way the color is selected here. So if you can imagine that the palette kind of has this gradient from, it starts from dark green goes over to turquoise, blue, then kind of goes through the whole rainbow, the whole list of rainbow colors. The way that you can see the colors mixing into each other is what I was talking about, where you loop back and forth through this palette whilst it's selecting each color, and then you get this result here, which is just, yeah, epic color bonanza in my view.
Yeah, that's an absolute stunner, man. There's just so many good ones. It's hard to, yeah. I'm sure it's got to be tough for you to kind of go through each of the mints and select your top 5-10 pieces. I'm sure that's got to be tough.
Yeah. So let's see now. I have this last one. Yeah.
Okay.
This is kind of the reason I wanted to just highlight this is the way the landscape and the sky are kind of playing together, and the way the beams are just kind of hitting through all of that. There's a lot of organic feeling to the landscape. There's some pits there, and then you have this, this nice wavy, background there, and the way it just punches through it and just has a lot of yield with a lot of graininess coming up. It's just, I love this composition here. So yeah, that's the mints I managed to find. There are a lot of them. It was hard to decide on just a few, so I'm not sure if I'm selected too many, maybe.
No, that's great. And I'm sure I'd be curious to know, in a year from now or even 5 years, if you were to go back through all the mints, would you pick the same ones? Because you mentioned about that darker background and how people said, hey, that was kind of like a fan favorite. So I'm curious to know over time how maybe some external things kind of maybe change your viewpoint of like, what are your favorite pieces? So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing those favorite mints from the harvest. And to kind of close things up from this project, where can people go to order prints?
Well, I have at the moment I have a web page that I'm working on. So my web page is on under construction. It's perkwork.art. But if you go to perkwork.art/harvest hyphen prints, you can also go to my Twitter and get the link from there. But you can see a list of there's only one print per mint. So if you want to buy an NFT and get it printed, make sure it hasn't been printed before. You can go to this page and see a comprehensive list of which ones have been printed and which one hasn't. And you can order through that same page there.
Great. We'll include those links inside of the show notes of this video.
Great.
Well, while we kind of wrap things up, I'm curious to know, now that the harvest is fully minted out, it's sold out, what are you working on next? Do you have any other projects kind of in the pipeline? Are you taking a little bit of time off? What do you have for the rest of 2023?
So I've been taking a little time off. It's hard because I kind of always feel I want to create, but the last half of the year has been quite hectic. So I've been disciplined enough to take some time off, but I'm also working on a few. I'm working on a project with a few one-of-ones coming up in a few months. I'm not going to go into more detail than that, but yeah, just stay tuned, and and you'll hear from me from there. There's also a gallery exhibition I'm participating in before summer sometime. Again, the details will come. And I'm already thinking about a new project, but that's probably at least half a year in the future. I need. I'll probably start working on that come in the beginning of summer, and maybe I would say another project in the size of the harvest. A long form type. The earliest would be at the end of this year, but most likely kind of beginning of next year. So hopefully I can keep a pace of a series each year or something like that, but with some one-on-ones and other projects, smaller projects too. But yeah,
great.
I'm not stopping anytime soon.
No, that's great to hear. I know it's got to be tough after completing a project, getting in that mindset of kind of creating again. But I'm glad that you're taking at least a little bit of time off. I think it's necessary for everyone in this space. But yeah, how can people, to kind of wrap things up, how can people reach you? Should they have any questions? Maybe they want to learn more about you and your work.
Yeah, sure. Twitter is probably the best bet. I'm there, and on Instagram. I will say that those are most likely the best places to get a hold of me. And it's a shame to say it, but I'm basically on there 24/7. So you can probably get me there.
Okay, sounds great. Well, to kind of wrap things up, I want to thank Per Kristian for joining me on After Dinner Mints. I really appreciate being on today.
Thank you very much. It's an honor being here, and I love our conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Well, to kind of wrap things up, I do want to talk a little bit about some news and notes. All of our After Dinner Mints discussions are available as a podcast. Make sure you check them out via Spotify, Apple, Google, and Amazon. Finally, we have an Art Blocks newsletter that gets delivered once a week with information on upcoming releases and generative art related news. You can find a link in the newsletter of the description of this YouTube video. Again, thank you, Per Kristian, for joining me on After Dinner Mints. For everyone tuning in, absolutely. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe to the Art Blocks YouTube channel. Be kind to each other, buy what you love, and we will see you all next time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.